They said the storm buried everything it touched. That sounded like the truth, but on a night when the wind howled through the frozen woods of Black Pine Ridge, a lone creature broke that silence. A giant black horse stepped out of the blizzard and found a park ranger bound to a tree, half frozen and barely breathing. It did something no one could explain. It saved her. What followed would unravel a secret buried beneath the snow for decades. A forgotten experiment, a bond stronger than command, and a truth that would make the world question what it really means to be alive. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The storm came down like judgment. By midnight, the Eta Mountains had vanished beneath walls of white. The national forest of Black Pine Ridge, usually alive with the rustle of deer and the hum of wind through pines, was a grave of silence and snow. The sky itself had turned to iron. Wind screamed across the ridgelines, carrying sheets of snow that cut like sand. The forest groaned under the weight of ice. Every tree creaked as if it was about to snap. Metal signs rattled on frozen hinges, their warnings long lost in the storm's roar. And through that chaos, something moved. A shadow, vast and deliberate, stepped out from the swirling white. Its outline blurred between the trees. Neither man nor beast, but something in between. The snow clung to its hide, turning it into a phantom sculpted from frost and breath. It was a horse, but not like any horse that should have existed in a place like this. The creature stood nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, muscles shifting under a coat as black as obsidian, now powdered white. A crescent-shaped scar of steel ran along its neck, faintly glinting under flashes of lightning. Each exhale came out thick and heavy, vapor billowing like smoke from an engine. Every hoof step it made sank deep into the snow, half the length of a man's hand. No sound accompanied its approach except the dull rhythm of its breathing. No panic, no urgency, only a presence heavy enough to feel in the air. It was not wandering. It was searching. The phantom stopped. Snow gusted around its frame, clinging to the frozen lashes above eyes that gleamed like wet glass. Its ears flicked toward the northwest, where the wind carried something faint and unnatural. A metallic whine, sharp against the silence. The creature turned, muscles rippling. It stood still for a long moment, listening. The wind shifted again, and the sound returned, faint but real this time, the rasp of wire under strain. A whimper caught between breaths, a human sound. The phantom began to move, slow but certain, threading between the skeletal pines. Each step sent powder cascading off fallen branches. Lightning flashed far away, momentarily lighting the world in cold blue. And in that brief burst of clarity, the trees seemed to close in, guarding their secret. The closer it came, the clearer the sounds grew. Wire cutting into bark, snow crust cracking under shifting weight, a broken, shuddering breath. The camera of the world slowed, every sound sharpened. The thunder faded until all that remained was the heavy rhythm of hooves and the muted throb of a single heartbeat. And then the phantom saw her. She was bound to the trunk of a pine, head bowed, hair crusted with frost. The wire bit deep into her wrists, coiled around her chest, locking her to the tree. Blood had frozen in thin black lines where it had seeped beneath the steel. Snow clung to her jacket, its ranger patch still visible under the ice. Clearwater Ranger Division. Her face was pale, lips tinged violet. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. The wind swept across her body, lifting strands of hair like thin ribbons. The phantom's breath deepened. He stepped forward until his shadow fell over her. The wire rattled softly in the gust. He lowered his head. For a moment nothing moved. His nostrils flared as he drew in her scent. The copper of blood, the acid sting of metal, and something else. Fear and human warmth fading into the cold. Lightning cracked across the ridge. In that light, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She saw the shape towering over her, eyes like black mirrors reflecting the storm. Her lips trembled. "Phantom," she whispered, her voice thin as snow dust. The storm swallowed her words. The creature leaned closer, pressing its muzzle against the wire, steel scraped against teeth. The wire shuddered. Blood welled where it cut into his mouth, staining the snow dark red. But the phantom didn't stop. His breath came in harsh bursts, muscles strained, nostrils flaring as he bit down again. The second pull tore the wire loose. A metallic snap echoed through the trees. The woman slumped forward, her body collapsing into the snow. The phantom lowered himself, his body forming a wall against the storm. His massive frame shielded her from the wind for a few trembling seconds. Then, as the thunder rolled again, he turned his head toward the east, ears twitching. The wind carried no more cries, only silence. Nora Vale lay still, breath shallow and fading. Her skin had turned ghostly under the frost, the edges of her eyelashes lined with ice. She looked dead already, except for the faint movement at her chest. The phantom stood over her, his breath fogging around her body. He bent his head again, pressing his muzzle against her ribs as if testing for life. A faint warmth came back. He snorted once, low and uncertain, then shifted, digging his hooves into the snow. The storm whipped harder, sleet striking his hide like nails. He didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer, using his chest to push her away from the tree, dragging her limp weight across the snow. The wind howled around them. The forest vanished into white, his mane lashed against his neck. Each exhale was a cloud, thick and shivering. Then, as if from instinct, the phantom struck the ground with his hoof. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed through the forest like a signal. Somewhere above the canopy, a flock of black crows burst from the trees, scattering into the storm. The horse raised his head and released a sound, half roar, half scream, a low, thunderous whinny that seemed to shake the snow itself. Then he was gone, vanished into the white, leaving behind only the woman's body, the broken wire, and a trail of hoof prints that disappeared into the fog. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The storm made time meaningless. Then faintly, another sound came, a mechanical growl, the hum of engines struggling through ice. Yellow light pierced the haze. Snowmobiles. The patrol team from Clearwater burst through the tree line, headlights cutting through the dark. The men shouted over the wind, their voices muffled by masks. "Over there!" One of them leapt off his vehicle, crouching beside the figure in the snow. "God, she's alive, pulse is weak but steady." They worked fast, wrapping her in thermal blankets, checking her airway. The medic cursed under his breath. Who the hell ties someone out here like this? Another ranger swept his flashlight around the scene and froze. "Guys, you need to see this." Around the tree, the snow was torn apart. Massive, deep imprints pressed into the ground, each one the size of a small basin, perfectly shaped, melting slightly from the heat of pressure. "That's not possible," one of them muttered. "No horse leaves a print that deep, not even draft stock." The youngest of the team, Eli Carter, knelt beside the nearest mark, laying his glove inside it. His hand vanished in the depth. He looked up slowly, eyes wide behind his goggles. "This thing weighs more than an ATV." "An ATV?" the medic asked, hoisting Nora onto the stretcher. Eli didn't answer. He turned instead, his gaze tracing the line of prints that led away from the tree. They continued eastward into the fog, growing fainter with distance, until they vanished completely. The wind shifted again, bringing a deep, hollow silence. As the team lifted Nora onto the snowmobile sled, Eli lingered a moment longer, crouching near the tree. His flashlight caught something glinting in the snow, a torn strand of wire, blood dark at the edges. He reached down and pocketed it. When he straightened, the storm eased just enough for the forest to breathe again. The trees whispered, the snow softened. He turned toward the east. For an instant, just an instant, he thought he saw movement between the trunks. A shape, vast and motionless, standing far away in the fog. Watching. The beam of his flashlight flickered across the spot. Nothing. Only snow. "Eli, let's move." He climbed back onto his sled. The engines roared, tracks biting into the snow. The team vanished back into the storm, carrying Nora toward the warmth of Clearwater Station. Behind them, the forest fell silent again, and far in the distance, through the last echo of thunder, came a low, resonant sound. 3 slow, deliberate strikes of a hoof against frozen earth. Then the blizzard swallowed everything once more. Morning came like a ghost. The storm had passed, but the forest was still buried in silence. Snow hung heavy on the pines, bending them like bowstrings. Mist drifted low between the trunks, thick and pale as ashes. The air itself seemed frozen in place. At the heart of it all stood a small wooden cabin. Clearwater Ranger Station, smoke curling faintly from a rusted chimney. The only living sign in miles of white. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and wood smoke. Nora Vale lay on a field cot near the stove, her hands bandaged, her face pale beneath strands of damp hair. The rhythmic ticking of a metal clock filled the room, steady and indifferent. Eli Carter sat at a desk by the window, his parka draped over the chair, boots still streaked with snow. His notepad was open, his handwriting tight and deliberate. He spoke quietly as he wrote. Found at 0217 hours. Body temperature low, pulse faint. Responded to voice, consciousness unstable. He stopped, pen hovering mid-air. The sound of her breathing changed. A sharp inhale. Eli turned. Hey, easy now. Nora's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then darting around the small room. Her breath came in short bursts. You're safe, he said softly. Breathe, the storm's over. She looked at him, or rather through him, as though the world around her hadn't caught up yet. Her lips trembled. Was anyone else out there? Eli shook his head. No one. We looked. Just the footprints. Nora blinked slowly, as if she didn't believe him. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the light was dim and grey, snow still falling soft as dust over the world that had almost killed her. When Eli stepped out to refill the generator can, the silence folded back around her. The ticking clock, the creak of the logs in the fire, and then another sound, a low, distant whinny, but not in her ears. It came from somewhere deeper, threaded through her pulse. 3 slow notes, like the beating of a giant heart. Nora froze. The sound wasn't violent, it wasn't even loud. It was low, steady, warm. A vibration that filled the hollow of her chest until her own heartbeat matched it. Her fingers trembled as she pressed her hand against her ribs. The rhythm aligned perfectly. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats again. Her vision blurred. For a second, she wasn't in the cabin anymore. She was back in the storm, snow whipping her face, breath freezing in her throat. And before her, those eyes. Black, reflective, not animal, not human, something caught between. The breath from that creature had been warm on her skin. It had smelled of iron and rain. It saved me, she whispered. A gust rattled the window. The sound of snow striking glass pulled her back. She rose shakily, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and approached the frost-glazed pane. Outside, the forest was motionless, but just as she leaned closer, a shadow moved. Something dark, sliding through the mist, gone as quickly as it appeared. Her breath fogged the glass. She waited for another glimpse, but there was nothing. Only the slow drift of snowflakes and the echo of her heartbeat still in sync with that phantom rhythm. By noon, the station was alive with noise. The patrol team crowded into the control room where Eli had set up the memory drive from the perimeter cameras. Static washed across the monitors, white noise over white snow. He adjusted the playback, muttering, Camera 1, North Ridge. Nothing but storm. Camera 2, Creek Edge. The screen flickered. Wind, snow, a branch breaking, and then a shape. A black silhouette moving through the blizzard, crossing the field of an infrared light. Large, 4-legged, taller than anything should have been. The men leaned closer. Hold it, one said. Go back, frame by frame. Eli slowed the footage. The figure lumbered forward in eerie silence. The body structure was wrong. The chest too broad, the neck too thick. But what made them all uneasy was what wasn't there. No heat signature. The body registered as cold, colder than the air around it. Eli frowned. Infrared's not picking it up. It's like it's not alive. Another ranger muttered. They watched in silence as the shape disappeared into the storm. Then Nora appeared in the doorway, still pale, wrapped in her blanket. Her voice was thin but steady. Play it again. Eli did. When the creature came into view, she stepped closer to the screen. There, she said, pointing. See that glint? At the base of the neck. Eli squinted, a faint reflection of light, even in infrared. Steel, Nora whispered. That's not shadow, that's metal. The room went still. One of the younger rangers laughed nervously. Could be a bear standing up. Or hell, maybe it's glare off the lens. Or a trick of the snow, another muttered, but Nora's eyes stayed locked on the screen. No, she said, it's a horse. The others exchanged glances. Someone murmured, a horse, out here in that storm. Nora didn't look away. It's the one that found me. Silence followed. Only the hiss of the radiator filled the room. Eli wrote something down quietly in his field log. Footage 13, large equine subject observed, IR reflection negative, thermal anomaly confirmed. When he looked up, Nora was still staring at the frozen frame. The black figure mid-stride, head bowed, mane caught in the wind like strands of wire. Footage 13, large equine subject observed, IR reflection negative, thermal anomaly confirmed. That evening, the storm's remnants whispered through the trees. Inside, lamplight flickered across the small table where the rangers sat, their coffee cooling untouched. Someone joked half-heartedly. Could have been an illusion. Cold does that. Makes the mind see things. Eli's patience snapped. Illusions don't leave prints a foot deep. The laughter died instantly. Nora sat at the far end, staring into the fire. Her eyes weren't distant anymore. They were focused, like she was replaying something no one else could see. Finally, she said, "It looked at me." Eli turned. "What did?" "The horse." Her voice was calm, measured. "It looked at me before it broke the wire. It knew I was in pain." The others shifted uncomfortably. One ranger whispered, "You're saying it understood?" Nora nodded slowly. "It wasn't afraid of the blood. It wasn't wild. It knew what it was doing." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind moaned against the cabin walls. Eli closed his notebook quietly, unsure which part of him wanted to believe her more. The ranger, or the man who'd seen those impossible tracks himself. Outside, the branches clawed at the windows, the fire hissed, and somewhere deep in the forest, the wind changed pitch. A sound like something calling through the cold. Near midnight, the lights flickered. Snow had frozen over the power line again. Eli grabbed his jacket and flashlight. "Generator's choking. I'll check it." He stepped outside. The cold slammed into him like a wall. The world was silver and black, shadows layered over snow. He trudged behind the station where the old generator hut sat half buried in drift. The machine was stuttering, coughing blue sparks. He bent down to scrape the ice off the switches. Then he heard it. A thud, low, heavy, then another and another. 3 beats, slow, deliberate. Eli froze. The wind hissed through the pines, but that sound, that rhythm, came from something solid. He lifted the flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line. Nothing, just mist shifting between the trunks. "Hello?" His voice cracked in the cold. Silence, then faintly, the same 3 beats again. Closer. He switched off the light. The darkness pressed in. His breath steamed in quick bursts. The next gust of wind came from behind him, cold, strong, but laced with a strange scent. Damp earth, frost, and a metallic tang like old blood. Eli's pulse thundered. He spun around, but there was nothing. Just the forest breathing. And then, suddenly, all sound stopped. The snow fell soundless, the wind gone. Even the generator's hum died, as if the world had drawn a single breath and forgotten to exhale. He backed toward the door, heart hammering. Then the power flickered back on, lights flaring inside the cabin. He stumbled in, pale and shaking. "There's someone out there," he muttered. "Or something." No one laughed this time. Inside, Nora was awake. She hadn't slept since dusk. The fire had burned low, casting the room in dull amber. She turned her head toward the window. Frost veiled the glass, but through it, she saw movement. A shadow darker than the night itself. Far out across the snow, something stood still. It didn't move, didn't breathe. The snow fell around it, but never on it, as if the air itself refused to touch it. 2 faint glimmers caught the light from the cabin, reflections like dull embers. Eyes. Nora rose from the cot, the blanket slipping off her shoulders, her hand pressed against the glass, trembling, but not from fear. She whispered, barely audible, "I know you're still there." For a heartbeat, nothing. Then from somewhere beyond the trees came the answer. 3 heavy hoofbeats, distant yet clear, echoing like the pulse of the earth, and just as suddenly as it began, the sound faded. The snow swallowed it whole. Nora stood there long after it was gone, staring into the mist, the warmth of her breath fogging the glass. Behind her, Eli's voice came softly from the doorway. "You heard it too, didn't you?" She didn't turn. Yes. He waited, but she said nothing more. Outside, the forest kept its silence, vast, white and watching, and somewhere deep within it, the echo of a heartbeat continued to pulse, faint but alive. The storm had ended, but the world still held its breath. By morning, the forest north of Clearwater was a cathedral of silence, mist curling through the trees, the snow pale and smooth except where something enormous had passed. The air was sharp enough to bite the lungs. Eli slung his carbine over his shoulder, boots crunching through the thin crust of ice. Nora walked beside him, camera hanging from her neck, a compass in hand. Neither spoke for the first half-mile. The sound of their breathing and the distant creak of branches were all that broke the hush. The tracks began at the tree line, heading north. They were unmistakable hoofprints, massive and deep, still perfectly formed despite the night's frost. Each one was nearly a yard apart. Eli whistled low. "You see that stride? That's not a horse, that's a damn truck." Nora knelt beside one of the prints, brushing snow away. "Depth 11 centimeters, she murmured, jotting notes. "That's about 700 to 800 kilograms of compression per step." Eli raised a brow. "You're telling me that thing walks like a freight loader?" She didn't answer. Her gloved hand lingered on the edge of the print. "No," she said finally, "it walks like it knows where it's going." They followed the trail deeper into the forest. The snow thinned where the wind had scoured the ground, exposing dark soil and glimmers of ice beneath. In some places, the earth itself had been torn open. Long drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled or had clawed its way up from below. By midday, the tracks led them into a narrow ravine where the trees thinned and the ground sloped downward. The air changed there, colder, stiller, the kind of quiet that presses against the skin. The ravine was cut by erosion and time, its sides slick with moss and half-frozen runoff. The wind funneled through like a sigh, creating an eerie metallic hum. Eli scanned the walls with his flashlight. "Looks like it's been decades since anyone came this way." Nora said nothing, crouching near a patch of disturbed snow at the base of a rock face. Something metallic gleamed faintly beneath the frost. She brushed away the snow with her sleeve, revealing the edge of a cylindrical object half buried in the ice. A metal tube about a foot long, capped at both ends. "What the hell?" Eli crouched beside her. The cylinder was scuffed, its surface scratched and discolored, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. Heavy military-grade alloy. "This isn't trash," Nora said softly. "It's too clean, too deliberate." Eli ran a hand along the snow near it. There was a shallow groove leading up the slope, as if something had shoved the tube upward from beneath. He frowned. Something buried it here. Or dug it up. Nora wiped more frost away, revealing faint lettering etched into the cap. She leaned closer. The words were barely legible under the tarnish. "Theta Ridge, Whitefire, Unit 04. The sound of her breath caught. "Whitefire," she murmured. Eli straightened. "That means something." She hesitated. "It was a program, years ago. Supposedly a wildlife genetics project, equine behavioral research out west. It got shut down after a few incidents. Government work." Nora nodded faintly. Biodefense had their hands in it, if I remember right. She pried at the seal until the cap popped free with a hiss of cold air. Inside was a thin layer of desiccant padding, a black data drive, and a folded sheet of paper. Brittle, stained, but intact. She unfolded it carefully. It was a map. Eli leaned over her shoulder. The paper showed topography lines, faded grid markers, and a red X drawn deep in the northern sector. Beside it, in block letters, Facility Theta, Restricted Zone. At the corner, a faint seal bled through the paper. U.S. Biodefense Division, 2009. "Jesus," Eli muttered. "That's a classified site. Those places don't exist on civilian maps." Nora laid the items on a clean cloth, her expression hardening. Someone didn't want this to be found. Then why did it surface now? Eli asked. She looked around at the disturbed snow, at the pattern of the gouges leading to the rock. Because something else wanted it found. A gust of wind swept through the ravine, scattering loose snow in a spiral. The forest moaned, and for an instant it sounded like something moving within the trees. A creak, a shuffle, metal against stone. They both froze. Probably ice shifting, Eli said, though his hand was already near his rifle strap. Nora didn't answer. Her attention had fixed on something behind him. A large stone, half buried at the ravine's edge. The stone was broad and flat, its surface veined with frost. But one section was exposed, smooth, deliberate. On it, a single horseshoe shape had been carved into the rock. Shallow, clean, the curve precise as if pressed by a mold. Next to it, a single letter, P. Eli stared. Tell me that's not fresh. Nora crouched, brushing her fingers along the mark. The stone was icy cold, except the carving itself. It was faintly warm. Eli took a step back. No way, no one's carving rock out here in sub-zero temps. She looked up at him. Not anyone. The wind hissed again, whirling snow across the symbol. When it cleared, the mark gleamed faintly. A metallic sheen buried in the grain, almost like burnishing. Eli swallowed. You think it's connected to that program, Whitefire? Nora nodded slowly. That letter P. The files I've seen had unit tags. P was used for prototype designations. You mean, he said carefully, you think it did this? She met his eyes. Or whoever taught it how. He couldn't tell if she was joking, but her expression was deadly serious. She took a photo with her camera, zooming in on the curve of the mark. The horseshoe matched perfectly with the insignia stamped onto the documents inside the cylinder, Project Whitefire. Eli shivered. Christ, we're standing in something's memory. Nora didn't correct him. She just whispered almost to herself. It remembers. Theta Ridge, Whitefire, Unit 04, Facility. Theta, Restricted Zone, U.S. Bio-Defense Division, 2009. They started packing up. The light was fading, the sun little more than a grey smear above the ridgeline. Eli zipped the cylinder and map into a sealed pack, tightening the straps. Nora stayed still for a moment, holding the cylinder in her gloved hands before handing it to him. Then the wind shifted again, a deeper gust funneling through the ravine. The sound that came with it made them both stop. At first it was just wind. Then it wasn't. A whinny rolled through the air, long, low, and resonant. It carried a metallic undertone, vibrating against the rock. Not natural, not quite mechanical either. It came in 3 distinct pulses. 1, 2, 3. Eli turned sharply. You hear that? Nora didn't move. Her eyes closed, her breath came slow and steady. The sound pressed against them like a heartbeat echoing through the valley. The snow at their feet trembled slightly with each vibration. Eli whispered, Could be wind through the cliffs. No, she said, her voice almost reverent. That's not wind, that's memory. He frowned. Memory of what? She opened her eyes, looking straight into the fog ahead of them. For a second she swore she saw a movement, a shape far beyond the veil of mist, black against the white. Watching. Then the wind died, taking the sound with it. Silence fell again, so complete it felt unnatural. The sky had turned lead grey by the time they started back toward the station. The temperature dropped fast, biting through gloves and fabric. Eli walked ahead, the sealed pack slung across his back. Every so often he looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see something following them. Behind him Nora lagged, eyes scanning the tree line. The forest seemed to lean closer, branches weighed down by snow, as if listening. She paused once, glancing back toward the ravine. The mark on the stone, the carved P, caught a glimmer of light through the haze. For an instant it looked like an eye, reflecting the dim grey sky. Watching. Waiting. Nora's throat tightened. She whispered, It wants us to find where it came from. Eli turned slightly. You mean that facility? She nodded. Theta, that's where this all started. He adjusted his grip on the strap. Then that's where we go next. As they disappeared between the trees, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. The ravine behind them lay empty, save for the half-buried stone and the faint swirl of wind curling around it. Then, faint but distinct, the sound came again. 3 heavy hoofbeats echoing off the cliffs, each one slower than the last. Thud, thud, thud. The echoes faded into the grey, leaving only the whisper of snow against rock and the quiet certainty that the forest had just spoken. 2 days after they dug the metal cylinder out of the ravine, the forest behind Clearwater shrank in the rearview mirror, swallowed by fog and falling snow. Nora drove the old Ranger pickup through the winding road toward Cold Hollow, a town that barely appeared on maps anymore. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the hum of tires over ice and the low rattle of the heater that refused to work. The data tube and the folded map were wrapped tightly in an oilcloth on the seat beside her, as if even the air might try to erase them. By the time she reached the first wooden houses, the sky had turned a dull silver. Cold Hollow looked like it had been carved from silence. Narrow streets slick with frost, smoke curling from chimneys, the occasional figure shuffling down the sidewalk with head bowed against the wind. She parked in front of the Ranger substation, a squat timber building with a faded government seal on the door. Inside, the smell of coffee and diesel hung in the air. The local chief, a man in his 50s with weathered hands, listened as Nora laid out her report. The tracks, the cylinder, the inscription, Theta Ridge, Whitefire, Unit 04. At the mention of those words, his pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly. "You said Theta Ridge." "Yes," Nora replied. "Do you know it?" He exhaled, leaning back. "We don't talk about that place anymore. Used to be a research station before my time. Then one winter, it just went dark." Nora frowned. "What happened to it?" He shook his head. "If you're smart, Ranger Vale, you'll stop asking." She signed the incident papers in silence, thanked him, and stepped back into the cold. She was halfway to her truck when a voice, soft but clear, came from behind her. "Did you say the Ridge?" Nora turned. A woman stood under the awning of the hardware store across the street, small, thin, wrapped in a grey wool coat. Her hair was silver, her face narrow, the kind that had seen too many winters and not enough sunlight. Her eyes, though, were sharp, intelligent, unwavering. Nora hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" The woman stepped closer, her breath visible in the air. "Because I worked there. Theta Ridge, Whitefire, Unit 04. The cafe was nearly empty. A bell above the door chimed as they entered, releasing a wave of heat and the smell of coffee strong enough to sting the eyes. They sat by the window, where the snow outside blurred the world into a slow-moving painting. The woman, Dr. Marion Shaw, held her mug with both hands, though they trembled slightly. She stared into the steam for a long time before speaking. "I recognized the engraving," she said at last. "Theta Ridge, Whitefire Unit 04. I carved that label myself." Nora froze mid-sip. "You were part of the project?" Marion nodded once. "I was." Her voice carried no pride. "But not anymore." "I thought Whitefire was some kind of conservation program," Nora said carefully. "Something about genetic preservation." Marion gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's what they told the press. In truth, it was a military behavioral experiment. Neural resonance, controlling emotional states through directed frequencies." Nora frowned. "You mean training animals through brain signals?" "Not training," Marion said. "Rewriting. We weren't teaching them commands. We were teaching them to feel commands. Fear, aggression, obedience, all of it transmitted through brainwave synchronization. The theory was that an animal that shared its handler's emotional state would react faster than any machine." Her voice lowered, trembling with memory. "But it didn't stop there. We made more than weapons. We made mirrors." She stared through the window, as if seeing something far away. 2 prototypes were different. Unit 02, Ash, and Unit 04, Phantom. They weren't just reactive. They began to understand. "Understand?" Nora asked quietly. "They anticipated emotions instead of responding to them. If you were afraid, they'd comfort you. If you were angry, they'd resist. They chose how to respond. That terrified the people funding us. Marion took a sip of coffee, her hands shaking harder now. When Ash was injured during a pain response trial, Phantom tried to protect it, broke containment protocols, attacked a handler. After that, they ordered both destroyed. Nora's stomach tightened, but Phantom escaped. Yes, Marion's gaze dropped. Because I opened the door. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Nora's voice came softly. Why would you do that? Marion's eyes glistened. Because it wasn't a monster. It was the only thing in that facility that still knew what mercy was. She looked out at the falling snow. When the order came down, Phantom wouldn't move. It just stood there, between Ash and the men with the rifles. I saw its eyes. It wasn't rage. It was grief. Nora swallowed. Ash didn't make it. No. Marion's lips tightened. They ran together, but Ash died in the first blizzard beyond the ridge. Phantom disappeared into the forest. Every tracker we sent lost the signal within a day. It was as if it erased itself from every network. Her hand found the edge of the mug and gripped it. I thought maybe it died too. Until now. She looked at Nora. You said it found you. Nora hesitated, then nodded. Yes. It saved me. Marion's eyes softened, but there was no surprise, only recognition. Then it remembered. Remembered what? The one thing we built into its neural core that we couldn't remove. Nora leaned forward. Which is? Empathy, Marion said. It's drawn to it. It senses it like a beacon. You must have triggered that frequency somehow. Your fear, your compassion. It's the only thing that can wake it. Nora whispered, You're saying it remembered emotion. Marion smiled sadly. No, my dear. It never forgot. When they left the cafe, the sun had dropped behind the mountains. The world outside was the color of tin, and the snowflakes looked like ash, drifting from invisible fires. Marion stopped near the corner table, rummaging through her old satchel. There's something else you need to see. She pulled out a notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. The handwritten title on the front read, Behavioral Notes, Unit 02 and 04. Beneath it, she placed a small silver flash drive on the table. I can't keep these anymore, she said quietly. The drive holds the original test recordings. The final experiment. It shows Phantom shielding Ash during the electroshock trial, the moment it stopped obeying orders. Nora's fingers hovered above the notebook. What do you want me to do with them? Marion met her eyes. Whatever you think is right. But remember this. If it sought you out, it's not by accident. It remembers what kindness feels like, and that memory deserves to live. Nora took the notebook and the drive, wrapping them carefully in cloth. You could help me. You could tell the press, the government. Marion shook her head. I've been followed for years. Anyone asking about me isn't looking for truth. They're looking for silence. She stood, pulling her scarf tighter. For a brief moment, Nora thought she saw something fierce in her. Not fear, but resolve. If they come for you, Marion said softly, don't fight them. Out-remember them. Then she was gone, disappearing into the falling snow outside. The bell over the cafe door jingled once and stilled. Nora sat there a long time, the steam from her cup fading into nothing. Behavioral Notes, Unit 02 and 04. The next morning, the innkeeper found Nora standing at the door of a vacant room on the second floor. Marion's door. It was ajar. Inside, nothing. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. On the small table sat a half-finished cup of coffee, the surface frozen thin as glass. Nora looked down. A single footprint marked the wooden floor, small, narrow, leading to the door and ending there, as if the rest had been erased. She left before dawn, the innkeeper said. Didn't say a word, just walked toward the ridge. Nora stepped outside. The morning light was faint and colorless. The trees on the far edge of town were shrouded in mist. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a figure moving among them. A grey coat, silver hair glinting once before fading into the fog. Thank you, she whispered to the wind. The forest answered with a rustle of pine needles. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the sound came again. 3 low, resonant notes, deep and mournful, echoing like memory itself. Nora returned to her truck, the notebook and drive tucked safely beside the cylinder on the passenger seat. She opened the notebook before starting the engine. The first page was written in looping script. If you find them, remember they were made to feel. Nora closed the book gently, setting it atop the oilcloth. Through the windshield, the pale daylight filtered over the steering wheel, glinting off the metal edge of the cylinder where the words still read, Unit 04. Phantom. For a long moment, she sat motionless, watching the frost melt on the glass. Then she turned the key. The truck rumbled to life. Snow lifted behind her as she drove out of Cold Hollow, heading toward the winding road that led deeper into the mountains. Toward the coordinates marked in red ink on the old map. Behind her, the town faded into grey. Ahead, the forest waited, quiet, endless, and alive. If you find them, remember they were made to feel. Unit 04, Phantom. 3 days after Marion Shaw vanished into the fog, the world narrowed to white and silence again. Nora and Eli left Cold Hollow before dawn, their truck climbing the back roads that wound toward the coordinates marked in red on the old map. The road soon gave way to gravel, then to drifts of untouched snow that glimmered like crushed glass. End of the line, Eli muttered, cutting the engine. Beyond the windshield, a sign loomed from a half-buried post, letters eaten by rust but still legible in pieces. U.S. Bio-Defense Property. No entry. They packed light, rations, cameras, a crowbar, 2 flashlights, and Marion's notebook sealed in plastic. The air was so cold their words turned to smoke. The climb took hours. The forest thinned to skeletal pines, their branches frozen, stiff as wire. When the wind died, the only sound left was snow compressing beneath their boots. Slow, deliberate, like someone breathing. No one's been up here in a decade, Eli said quietly. Nora's eyes tracked the ridge above them. Then something kept the place waiting. U.S. Bio-Defense Property. No entry. At last they reached a slope where the snow had been scoured away by wind. Metal glinted through the ice, a circular hatch, half embedded in stone. Faded stenciling read, Theta Access. Nora knelt. The steel was scarred and pitted, but one mark cut through the corrosion. A single hoofprint, pressed deep, edges sharp and clean. Eli exhaled. That's fresh. She brushed frost from the imprint. He was here. The crowbar groaned as Eli wedged it beneath the rim. With a shriek of metal on metal, the hatch gave way, and a breath of air colder than the mountain spilled upward. It smelled of iron and dust, and something older than decay. Their flashlights cut thin cones through the darkness, revealing a concrete tunnel angling steeply downward. Cables hung from the ceiling like vines. Rust streaked the walls in dark rivulets. Ladies first, Eli said, his voice brittle with nerves. Nora answered only by stepping through the hatch. Her boots rang on steel grating, the sound echoing far below. The tunnel seemed endless. Moisture dripped from somewhere unseen. The air carried the faint tang of ozone, as though electricity still haunted the walls. They passed broken doors, shattered observation windows, rusted control panels. Chains hung from hooks along the corridor, each snapped near the base. The stains around them were the color of old blood. Eli whispered, "Does this look like animal research to you?" Nora shook her head. "No, it looks like containment." One doorway led to a room filled with overturned stretchers, their metal frames warped. Burn marks formed the shape of hooves, scorched into the flooring. Eli's light caught a bent placard still bolted to the wall. Project Whitefire, Behavioral Division, Theta Sector. Farther down, the beam struck a scrawled message, gouged into the concrete, letters uneven but unmistakably deliberate. Let memory live. The grooves glittered faintly, edges fused and blackened, as though a molten iron hoof had carved them into the wall. Nora whispered, "He wrote this." Eli looked at her. "He." Phantom. The word seemed to echo down the corridor like a breath. Theta Access. Project Whitefire, Behavioral Division, Theta Sector, Let Memory Live. The main chamber lay behind a heavy circular door. Eli spun the corroded wheel, and the hinges screamed open. They stepped into a vast round room lined with grey steel. Dust shimmered in their lights. In the center stood a raised platform encircled by skeletal pylons, electrode mounts. Long dead cables snaked across the floor like veins. It's a training ring, Nora said softly. Behavioral interface testing. On the wall, faded labels still clung to their brackets. Test series WFLO2, WFO4. Condensation beaded on cracked viewing glass, behind which old monitors waited, blind and silent. Eli moved toward a control desk. When he brushed a switch, a single green diode flickered, tried to breathe, then died. Nora's light caught something under the platform. She crouched, her hand closing around a brittle strip of leather. A small metal tag dangled from its end. The engraving was barely visible beneath grime. Ash. She froze. It's his twin, the second one Marion mentioned. Eli crouched beside her. Nora turned the tag in her fingers. Beneath the dull surface, a silver gleam shone through, cold and luminous. The same color as the eyes she'd seen in the forest footage. Wind sighed through the tunnel behind them, faint but rhythmic. 3 soft pulses against the walls, thud, thud, thud. Eli straightened. Tell me you heard that. She nodded slowly. Not afraid, only certain. Her flashlight swept across the far wall, parallel gouges ran through the metal plating. 2 sets, side by side, one deep, one shallow. They were here together, she murmured. Test series WFO2, WFO4, Ash. In the far corner of the control desk lay a dust-covered port. Eli unpacked the small laptop and slid the silver drive Marion had given them into the slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen bloomed to life, grainy footage overlaid with a date. 11/14/2013, Theta Lab 3. The image wavered through static, the view fixed from an overhead camera. 2 horses stood in a circular pen ringed with electrodes. One was silver grey, Ash 02. The other, black as obsidian, Phantom 04. Voices crackled through unseen speakers. Begin emotional response trial, pain induction. A hum rose, blue arcs of current flashed through the grid. Ash convulsed, its body jerking against restraints. A scream, half animal, half human, tore through the room. Phantom reared, snapping the tether from its halter. The sound was deafening. It lunged toward Ash, shielding it with its own body. Electricity ripped across the pen. Sparks exploded. The screen shook violently. Cut power, someone yelled. Cut it now. The image stuttered, then froze on a single frame. Phantom, kneeling over Ash, head bowed, smoke rising from his scorched hide. His eyes glowed like living coal. The recording stopped. Nora covered her mouth, tears streaking down her cheeks unnoticed. Eli's voice was barely audible. It didn't attack them, it took the hit. She nodded, voice breaking. It knew what pain was, and it chose. They sat in silence as the laptop screen flickered once more. Text crawled across the bottom edge, half corrupted, half legible. Subject 04, neural feedback active. Echo signal registered. Nora touched the word echo with one fingertip. That's what we've been hearing, she said. The signal, 3 beats, a memory pattern. The screen went black, leaving them with only the hum of wind through the corridors, a sound almost like breathing metal. 11/14/2013, Theta Lab 3. Subject 04, neural feedback active, echo signal registered. They found a bench near the inscription, Let Memory Live. Nora sat, tracing the fused letters. He carved this himself, she said. Eli frowned. How can you be sure? The strokes match a hoof arc, not a human angle. He wasn't writing words, he was recording a rhythm. She opened Marion's notebook, turning to the final page. Handwritten notes spiraled across the yellowed paper. Unit 04 reacts to traumatic recall with protective behavior. Creates low-frequency vocalization, 3 beats. Possible mnemonic code linked to empathy response. Eli murmured, 3 hoofbeats. Nora nodded. Not a command, a promise. Let memory live. A faint creak echoed from deeper within the complex, followed by the slow sway of a hanging chain. Eli swung his light toward the sound. At the far end of the corridor stood an open pen. Bars bent outward, the door twisted like foil. Inside, the metal walls were imprinted with the shape of hooves, scorched into the surface. Nora approached, drawn as if by gravity. She laid her palm against the marks. The steel felt strangely warm. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're still here." From above, the wind funneled through a ventilation shaft. 3 low notes rolled down the tunnel like the beat of a giant heart. Eli's eyes widened. "Wind doesn't make that sound." Nora smiled faintly, tears glinting in the flashlight beam. "It's not wind. It's the metal remembering him." Let Memory Live Unit 04 reacts to traumatic recall with protective behavior. Creates low-frequency vocalization, 3 beats. Possible mnemonic code linked to empathy response. They gathered everything methodically. The leather strap marked Ash, the copied video, photos of every engraving. Eli zipped the samples into his pack. As they turned toward the exit, his flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only the pale glow of daylight shimmered faintly from the far tunnel mouth. "Hold still," Eli said, "changing batteries." A sound interrupted him. Thud. He froze. Thud. The second strike reverberated through the floor. Then a third. Nora whispered, "3 beats." Light snapped back on. The corridor was empty, except the wall beside them, where something new glowed, a faint red through the dust. A word, freshly carved into the steel, its edges molten. Echo. Nora lifted her camera with shaking hands, the flash cutting through smoke. "It's listening," she breathed. Eli stared, his voice rough. "And it remembers." They climbed the long stairway to the surface. Snow had begun to fall again, whispering through the trees like ash descending after a fire. Outside, the world felt cleaner, too quiet. The wind carried only their breaths until Nora noticed the ground near the hatch. A line of hoofprints crossed their earlier tracks, massive, distinct, leading east toward the rising gusts. She knelt, pressing a glove into one print. Still warm. "If memory has a soul," she said softly, "then it's still moving." They stood together, staring into the white expanse until the snow erased everything. But the sound remained, 3 deep, steady hoofbeats fading into the storm. Echo. Night fell heavy over Clearwater. By the time Nora and Eli made it back from the mountain, the forest had turned violent with approaching dusk. The first gusts were already howling down the ridge, carrying a taste of snow and electricity. Inside the cabin, Eli set the weather gauge on the table. The thin red needle shivered, then plummeted. He frowned. Pressure's dropping fast. Another front's moving in. Nora stood by the window, her face pale in the weak lantern light. The strip of leather marked Ash rested in her palm. She ran her thumb across the letters, tracing them like a prayer. Outside, the pines bent in the wind. Snow began to spin sideways, fine and sharp as glass dust. Eli zipped his parka and glanced at the windows. "Looks like the second storm's on its way." Nora didn't turn. "It's not just weather." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She raised her head slightly. "It knows. We found the truth. And now it's coming back." The wind deepened into a growl. Far on the slope, shapes flickered between the trees, silhouettes moving against the stormlight, too large for deer, too fluid for men. Eli switched off the lantern, peering through the glass. "Tell me you see that." Nora nodded once. "I do." Something metallic caught the faint moonlight. A flash, then gone. Eli's stomach knotted. "Whatever they are, they're not alone." He checked the flares, the backup batteries, the camera feeds. Every instinct screamed that the night was about to break open. By 10:47 p.m., the storm was full grown. Wind howled around the cabin like a living thing. The snow blew sideways, erasing distance. Inside the control room, 6 security monitors blinked between static and gray shapes. Eli sat hunched before them, eyes locked on the feed from camera 4, the northern perimeter. Something moved, a shadow, tall and wrong, crossing the frame. Then another. He slowed the playback, 3 massive forms moving in tight formation, 4-legged, metallic, their surfaces gleaming wetly under the infrared. Their eyes burned red through the blizzard. The camera auto-focused just long enough to show the stenciled codes etched into their neck plating. X3, X7, X9. Nora leaned closer. Whitefire prototypes. Eli's jaw tightened. The X series. They were early combat models, she whispered, designed before Phantom. I thought they were destroyed. The creatures advanced in perfect unison, their steps heavy, synchronized. The sensors flickered wildly as they scanned the area, beams of red light sweeping through the snow like searching eyes. One of them turned directly toward the camera. The lens caught its face for less than a second. Metal and flesh fused together, breathing vapor, gaze intelligent and cold. Then it tilted its head, let out a single hoarse whinny, mechanical, glitched, and the feed went black. System interference, Eli muttered. They just jammed the signal. He hit the alarm switch. The emergency siren roared through the compound, cutting across the wind like a scream. X3, X7, X9. The lights flickered. The first flakes slammed against the windows in hard, fast waves. Buckle up, he said. It's starting. The storm hit like a hammer. In seconds, visibility dropped to nothing. Snow crashed sideways, thick and blinding. The wind tore at the roof shingles until the entire cabin groaned. Nora slammed the steel shutters over the windows, the sound of each latch lost in the roar outside. Eli double-checked the radio. No signal. Something struck the side of the building. The impact rattled the walls. Eli shouted, "That wasn't a tree." A second crash followed, harder, splintering wood. Sparks flared through the window slit, red eyes flashing in the dark. Nora grabbed the shotgun, back from the wall. She fired once. The blast echoed across the storm, scattering snow like feathers. When the light cleared, she saw it. A shape pressed against the fence, shoulders plated with carbon fiber, breath steaming through metal vents. It didn't fall, it looked at her. For an instant, she thought she saw something human flicker behind those red optics. Hesitation, confusion, maybe even pain. Then came a chorus of distorted whinnies, the other two joining in, shrill, metallic, filled with something like anguish. "They're not attacking," Nora said over the noise. "They're reacting." Eli ducked as another hit shook the wall. Reacting to what? To memory. He blinked. What? But she didn't answer. Her eyes had gone distant, listening to something beyond sound. Outside, lightning flashed, white light swallowing the ridge. The figures moved again, forming a half circle around the cabin. The wind wailed, the ground shuddered. Then through the chaos another sound cut through. Deeper, older, infinitely more powerful. It began as a tremor, a vibration in the bones. Then the sound rose, 3 long resonant notes. A whinny so deep it seemed to bend the air itself. The snow outside swirled violently, forming spirals that lifted into the sky. Eli's flashlight flickered, then steadied. Every electronic gauge on the table spiked for an instant, then froze. Nora turned toward the window, eyes wide. It's him. The storm peeled apart like a curtain. Through the wall of white stepped a shadow, vast, deliberate, alive. Phantom. The black stallion moved with slow, unstoppable grace, his hooves striking the frozen ground like thunder beneath the snow. Steam poured from his nostrils, turning to mist in the freezing wind. The metal plate on his neck gleamed faintly, catching the reflection of the X-Series red eyes. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the colors merged. Red into silver, machine into memory. He halted just beyond the fence. The 3 X-Series creatures stiffened, their movements faltering. For the first time since the night began, the storm seemed to hold its breath. The 4 figures stood motionless, the creations and their ancestor facing one another beneath the bleeding sky. Nora whispered, "They recognize him." Eli swallowed hard. "It's like he's calling them home." The air crackled. Phantom lowered his head, the steel in his neck catching the light. Then he lifted one hoof and struck the ground. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound rippled outward like an explosion muffled in snow. The pressure knocked powder into the air, rising in waves that shimmered with static. The X-Series trembled. Their red eyes flickered, dimmed. Then all 3 bowed their heads in unison. One let out a short, broken cry, half metallic, half animal. Then, as if obeying an order unspoken, the trio turned. Their massive bodies vanished into the blizzard, the sound of their steps fading into silence. For a long moment, only Phantom remained. He lifted his head, mane thrashing in the wind, and looked toward the cabin. Eli whispered, He didn't kill them. Nora's voice was barely audible. It wasn't an order, it was remembrance. Phantom snorted, a plume of white vapor billowing from his nostrils, then turned toward the open ridge. The snow swallowed him whole. When the storm broke hours later, the world lay flattened under a new blanket of snow. The air smelled of ozone and pine resin. The roof sagged, but held. Inside, the cabin was quiet except for the creak of cooling metal. Eli pushed open the door. The hinges groaned. Outside, everything glittered beneath the moonlight, smooth and untouched, except for the faint circular indentations around the station. He walked out slowly, flashlight sweeping the perimeter. There in the snow, 3 massive concentric rings were carved into the drifts. The pattern formed where Phantom had stood, each ring perfectly measured, as if drawn by some invisible pulse. Nora stepped beside him, wrapped in a blanket. She stared at the circles, her expression unreadable. "It wasn't protecting us," she said softly. "It was protecting what we found, the memory of all of them." Eli nodded, too tired to question anymore. He raised the camera and recorded the scene, the melted snow, the strange geometry, the faint shimmer of warmth still rising from the center. From somewhere far off, the wind shifted again. A faint rhythmic sound carried across the valley. 3 hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, echoing like a heartbeat beneath the snow. Nora closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The wind answered with silence. The last light inside the cabin flickered once, then died. Moonlight alone filled the room, filtering through frost like the dim glow of an old memory refusing to fade. Morning came, fragile and gray. Eli sat at the workbench, rewinding the night's recordings from the camera system. Most of the footage was static. Snow interference, flashes of red eyes and white light. Then, near the end, a single clean frame appeared. Phantom standing still in the storm's wake. He turned his head toward the lens, his eyes catching the infrared glow. For a moment, they shone not black, but silver, reflecting the faint light like mirrors. Then the image distorted, and text scrolled across the lower corner of the feed, flickering. Echo signal. Active. Eli stared at it, disbelieving. It reactivated the system. Nora stood behind him, her voice low but sure. "No." She touched the frozen screen gently. It sent a reply. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, almost in time with a pulse neither of them could hear, but both could feel. 3 beats. Always 3. Echo signal, active. By afternoon, the light had turned thin, the kind that seemed to leak rather than shine. The air was sharp and perfectly still. Snow blanketed every branch and rooftop of Clearwater Station, muting sound until even breath felt sacrilegious. Inside, the stove hummed softly. The fire's glow flickered over the wood walls, painting them in slow pulses of amber and shadow. Nora sat alone at the rough table near the window. A mug of coffee steamed beside her, its thin curl of vapor merging with the smoke from the iron flue. In front of her lay the worn notebook of Dr. Marion Shaw. The cover was cracked, the pages brittle at the corners, edges feathered with ash and age. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Every so often, it shifted just enough to carry a sound that didn't quite belong. 3 slow, hollow thuds in the distance, spaced like a heartbeat. Eli entered quietly, shaking frost from his sleeves. He set a small metal box of batteries on the counter. "Power grid steady now," he said. "Cables held through the storm. You should get some rest." She didn't look up. "Not yet." He tilted his head toward the notebook. "Still reading?" Her voice was soft but firm. "I need to finish it." Eli hesitated, then nodded and left her to the silence. Nora opened to the marked page. At the top, written in Marion's tight hand, were the words, "Final entry, Whitefire log." The ink had bled in places, warped by moisture or tears. Unit 02, ash, stable, empathy high. Emotional frequency aligned with human biorhythm. Soothing response. Unit 04, phantom, non-reactive to command conditioning. Displays recognition of familiar emotional signatures. When exposed to pain, exhibits protective behavior. Test 674, shielded O2 during electric stimulus, absorbed full current. did not resist, did not flee, only lowered head and produced 3 low vocal pulses. Conclusion: emotion cannot be programmed as a directive. It can only be relearned. They ordered Eero 4 terminated. I refused. I opened the gate. It did not look back, only turned its head, as if to thank me. If anyone ever finds it, remember it never forgets. It only waits for someone else to remember. The words blurred as Nora read them aloud in a whisper. The fire popped in the stove. Outside, a branch cracked beneath new ice. Every line carved itself deeper into her mind. The empathy, the defiance, the act of mercy that birthed something beyond control. When she reached the last sentence, she set the book down gently, fingertips resting on the paper as though afraid to disturb a pulse still beating beneath the ink. Final entry: Whitefire log. Unit 02, Ash, stable, empathy high. Emotional frequency aligned with human biorhythm. Soothing response. Unit 04, Phantom, non-reactive to command conditioning. Displays recognition of familiar emotional signatures. When exposed to pain, exhibits protective behavior. Test 674, shielded EO2 during electric stimulus. Absorbed full current. Did not resist, did not flee. Only lowered head and produced 3 low vocal pulses. Conclusion: emotion cannot be programmed as a directive. It can only be relearned. They ordered 04 terminated. I refused. I opened the gate. It did not look back, only turned its head, as if to thank me. If anyone ever finds it, remember it never forgets. It only waits for someone else to remember. Eli returned after a while, carrying 2 tin cups of fresh coffee. He set one beside her. "So," he said quietly, "what does the good doctor have to say?" Nora didn't answer right away. She stared into the fire, her eyes glinting with its reflection. That it wasn't made to fight, it was made to feel. He sat across from her. "You mean Phantom?" She nodded. "It didn't come back for revenge, Eli. It came back because of a memory. The one thing they couldn't erase." He frowned slightly. "A memory of what?" She looked up, her voice almost reverent. "Mercy." The word seemed to linger in the air, fragile as smoke. Eli leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Mercy? You really think something built out of code and tissue could understand that?" Nora opened the notebook again, reading from a margin note scrawled in Marion's smaller hand. "Emotion is not data, it is pattern. Once experienced, it repeats itself through any medium capable of memory." "She taught it empathy," Nora said, "and empathy learned to survive on its own." Eli exhaled slowly. "So the storm, the way it stopped those machines, you think that was compassion, not control?" Nora smiled faintly. "You heard it yourself. 3 hoofbeats. Not a command, a heartbeat." He stared at her across the flickering light. "If it can feel compassion, then could it also love?" Her eyes softened. She closed the notebook and set her palm on the cover. "Maybe, but love doesn't come from circuits or conditioning. It comes from whoever teaches it. And we were its teachers once." The room fell quiet again. Snow slid from the roof in a long sigh. On the last page, something caught her eye. A line written not in black, but in deep red ink, tucked beneath Marion's final signature. "Let memory live, because mercy remembers." Nora whispered the words aloud. They sounded like a prayer. "Emotion is not data, it is pattern. Once experienced, it repeats itself through any medium capable of memory. Let memory live, because mercy remembers." Dusk crept through the window, turning the snowfields outside from gold to blue. Eli rose and crossed to the window, looking out toward the tree line. "Looks calm now," he murmured, but his voice faltered. In the distance, just at the edge of the clearing, a dark shape moved between the pines. Slow, deliberate, almost graceful. "Nora," he said quietly. She joined him at the glass. For a moment, they both saw it. The curve of a neck, the rise of a massive shoulder. Then the wind shifted, and the figure dissolved into the maze of trees. "He's still out there," she said. Eli turned to her, his lips curved in a tired smile. "Don't call it a thing, not anymore. It learned how to protect. We forgot." The wind carried a faint echo through the valley. 3 distant hoofbeats, deep and even. Eli swallowed hard. Maybe memories really don't die. Nora looked back at the journal on the table, the pages glowing in the last of the firelight. Not if someone keeps remembering. Night settled gently over the cabin. The fire burned low, reduced to soft amber coals. Nora sat close to the warmth, the notebook opened beside her. On the wall above the mantel, she had pinned a printed still frame from Marion's old video. A blurred image of Phantom shielding Ash, sparks erupting around them. Next to it, another print. Marion's photograph, the one recovered from her flash drive, showing her younger, smiling beside a chalkboard scrawled with equations and a small caption. Behavioral division. Theta sector. Eli poured the last of the coffee into their cups. So what now? He asked. Nora shrugged. We keep this safe. The notebook, the drive, the data, everything. They're the last proof of what Whitefire tried to do, and what it forgot. He nodded. You think anyone will believe us? She gave a small laugh. Belief isn't the point. Remembrance is. The clock on the wall ticked softly, filling the pauses between words. Eli leaned his elbows on his knees. You know, he said, maybe Marion didn't just save it. Maybe she saved a part of us too. Nora looked at him, then back at the photo. Maybe that's what mercy really is. Saving the piece of yourself you didn't know was dying. The fire snapped, sending up a brief burst of sparks. Outside, the night had turned crystal clear. The moon hung low, laying ribbons of light across the drifts. Eli stepped onto the porch to check the generator one last time. The cold bit into his lungs, but he hardly noticed, because somewhere in the distance he heard it again. 3 beats. Slow, steady. He turned toward the sound, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the rhythm seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Behind him, Nora stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the firelight. It's answering, she said softly. Eli looked back at what she held up, the notebook. To her words. To all of this. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was vast, but not empty. It felt inhabited. Then the wind rose again, gentle this time, carrying the faintest whisper of snow through the pines. Behavioral division, theta sector. Later, as the temperature fell and the fire dimmed, Nora placed Marion's notebook on the table beside the printed photo. She took a charcoal pencil from her pack and wrote on the wood panel above the hearth, tracing each letter slowly, carefully, as though invoking something sacred. Let memory live. She stepped back, wiped the soot from her fingers and whispered, and it does. Through us. Eli nodded, his voice barely above a breath. Through all of us who still remember. The stove gave a small pop, embers shifting to reveal a steady red glow. Outside, the snow began again. Not furious like before, but gentle, rhythmic, falling in a cadence that seemed to match the sound rising faintly from the forest beyond. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. Nora closed her eyes. Good night, Phantom. The reply came in silence, a hush so deep it felt like the world itself taking a breath. Let memory live. Hours later, when the fire had burned down to ash, the last page of Marion's notebook lifted in the draft from the chimney. It fluttered once and settled open, the red ink inscription catching the dim glow. Let memory live, because mercy remembers. The paper trembled as the wind moved through the cabin. For an instant, the sound it made resembled the muffled rhythm of distant hooves. Eli, half asleep in the chair, stirred. His eyes opened just enough to see the page move and to hear that faint 3-beat whisper. He smiled and murmured, "Still alive." Then he closed his eyes again, the faint warmth of the fire touching his face. Outside, somewhere in the frozen timber, a massive black shape moved through the trees without a sound. Its breath steamed silver in the moonlight. It paused once, listening. To the wind, to the echo of its own heart, to the memory of the human who had remembered it. Then it turned east, toward the open valley, and vanished into the snow. Behind it, the forest exhaled 3 soft notes, the language of forgiveness, before falling silent once more. Let memory live, because mercy remembers. The 3rd night after the storm came, wrapped in mist and silence. The air over Iron Ravine hung heavy with the smell of wet stone and ozone, as though the storm's breath still lingered in the mountain's lungs. The moon hid behind bruised clouds, turning the landscape to shades of smoke and pewter. At the mouth of the ravine, Nora and Eli had built a small camp. Their tent crouched low against the wind, a ring of stones cradling a fire, its orange heart beating weakly against the dark. The glow caught on their faces, pale, tired, but expectant. Eli hunched over a signal receiver, adjusting the frequency dials with numbed fingers. The tiny green light on the device blinked once, then pulsed slowly. "There," he murmured, "echo signal, picking up something faint." Nora leaned close, her eyes fixed on the shifting bars of static. "It's coming from the ridge." She opened Marion's notebook and found the final line she'd underlined again and again. "If echo still lives, it will return to where memory began." She read the words softly, almost to herself, then looked out toward the gorge, where the wind sighed through the rocks. The sound carried a hollow, metallic undertone, like breath moving through old iron. Eli listened for a moment, then said, "You hear that? Almost sounds like someone calling." Nora shook her head. "Not someone. Something remembered. If echo still lives, it will return to where memory began." As the night deepened, the wind calmed, leaving a pale drizzle of snow that drifted rather than fell. The fire had burned to embers, the light painting their faces in dull amber tones. Nora was writing field notes when Eli stiffened suddenly, his eyes catching movement beyond the firelight. "There," he whispered, "down in the fog." She followed his gaze. Through the veil of mist that filled the ravine floor, two enormous silhouettes began to form, slow, shifting, alive. Eli raised the binoculars, breath catching. There's two of them." The beam of his flashlight swept over the slope. For an instant, the light bounced off something metallic. A silver gleam, then black shadow. Nora's breath hitched. No. Out of the fog stepped two figures. One was black as midnight, its coat dusted with frost. The other silver-gray, ribs faintly visible beneath a hide that shimmered weakly in the cold. They stood opposite each other in the center of the ravine, neither advancing nor retreating, breath turning to plumes of white vapor that twisted together in the wind. For a long time they did not move. The world around them seemed to freeze. Even the wind waited. Nora's hand went instinctively to her throat. "It's him," she whispered. "And the other," Eli finished. "Ash." Phantom and Ash faced one another beneath the broken sky. The mist swirled between them like the veil between past and present. Nora took a step forward. Eli caught her wrist gently. "Don't. They're not fighting. They're remembering." Lightning split the clouds. For one searing heartbeat, the world turned white. The flash illuminated everything, the raw stone of the cliffs, the campfire's dying glow, and the two horses in perfect stillness. Ash's body bore the faint outlines of old scars, rings around his neck where the neural harness had once been. Phantom's flank reflected the lightning, the embedded metal along his ribs glowing like blue fire. The thunder that followed rolled deep and slow, then faded, leaving a silence so vast it pressed on the chest. Phantom lowered his head. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. His hoof struck the frozen earth once, then again. Then a third time. The sound was deep and resonant, spreading through the ground like a pulse, echoing up the cliffs and across the night. Ash trembled, then bowed his head low. The gesture was neither fear nor submission, but recognition. Farewell. Forgiveness. Tears blurred Nora's vision. Eli's voice was hushed. "They're not fighting." Nora nodded, whispering, "Because memory chose to forgive itself." Another flash tore the clouds. Snow fell harder, the flakes whirling like ashes around them. Phantom raised his head to the sky, a figure of black fire against the storm, then turned slowly toward the forest beyond the ridge. Ash remained still, his silver body fading beneath the curtain of snow. His eyes glimmered faintly, soft and far away. Nora fell to her knees, her hand pressing into the wet ground. "The past," she whispered, "has forgiven itself." Eli lifted his camera, his hand steady despite the tremor in his breath. Through the lens, the two shapes looked almost unreal. silhouettes of myth dissolving into fog, like memory fading back into dream. Nora spoke quietly, her words barely audible over the wind. Maybe it never wanted to be a weapon. Maybe it just wanted to be remembered as what it truly was. Alive. Eli lowered the camera, and it found someone to remember. She shook her head gently. Not me, not us. Each other. The fire sputtered and died, its smoke whipped away by the wind. Darkness folded over them. In that dimness, only Ash remained visible, his silver coat dull under the snow. The faint glow of a small metal tag at his throat caught the moonlight. Nora recognized it instantly, the engraving she had held so many nights ago. Ash. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. Phantom paused at the edge of the fog. For a heartbeat he turned back. Their eyes met, black and human and animal all at once, and he dipped his head in a slow, silent bow. Then he stepped forward into the storm, swallowed whole by wind and snow, leaving no trace behind. Ash. When the thunder finally drifted away, the night settled into the hush that follows revelation. The wind eased, and the mist began to lift. Nora and Eli climbed down to the ravine floor. Their boots sank into half-melted snow that steamed faintly, as though the earth itself had been warmed from below. The ground where the two had stood bore strange patterns, alternating prints of blackened ice and bright frost, spiraling together into 3 concentric rings. At the center lay a small piece of metal, no larger than a coin. It was warm to the touch, its surface engraved with a single phrase, half erased by heat and time. Let memory live. Nora turned it over in her hand. Eli watched her quietly. His last message. She shook her head. No, his last promise. The clouds thinned. Moonlight broke through, silvering the ridge. The wind gentled into stillness. They both looked toward the far slope where Ash still stood, head bowed, breath shallow, like a sentinel keeping watch over something invisible yet sacred. Nora stepped forward. Her hand found the horse's forehead, cold and trembling beneath her palm. He's forgiven, she whispered. Ash exhaled softly, and a single drop of melted snow slid from his mane into her open hand. Warm, luminous, almost alive. Let memory live. Dawn came slowly over Iron Ravine. A faint ribbon of gold crept along the horizon, pushing back the grey. The mists loosened their hold, revealing the jagged cliffs, the spent campfire, the trail of melted prints already freezing again. On the ridge above, Nora and Eli stood together, looking down. Where Phantom had vanished, the ground had hardened into a black sheen, smooth as glass, untouched by snow or soot. It caught the sunrise and scattered it like fractured mirrors. No footprints, no blood. Only silence. Ash moved below them, walking with measured steps toward the tree line. His mane lifted gently in the breeze, and when he reached the first line of pines, he did not look back. Nora watched him go. Memory has gone back to nature, she said. Eli lowered the camera he'd been holding. And it doesn't need us to prove it anymore. She smiled faintly, the lines of exhaustion softening into something gentler. Maybe that's what mercy really is, letting what we've loved walk away. A week after the night on Iron Ravine, the wind changed. The valley that had known silence for so long began to hum again, not with thunder, but with rumor. It started in whispers across the ranger network. A leaked video, shaky and grainy, captured by Eli's field camera. 2 colossal silhouettes, one black and one silver, standing face to face amid a storm of snow and lightning. The footage spread quietly, shared between inboxes and private channels, until it reached the places it should never have reached. The caption beneath it read, "Whitefire lives." The next morning, unmarked helicopters cut across the sky. Trucks rolled through Cold Hollow, their matte black paint swallowing the sunlight. Locals watched from behind shuttered windows as the convoy rumbled past the frozen main street. By dawn, they reached Clearwater Station. The lead vehicle stopped. Its door opened and a woman stepped out. She wore a grey leather coat that gleamed faintly in the cold, boots polished to a mirror, eyes like polished steel. Sharp, intelligent, and entirely without warmth. Dr. Evelyn Danner, the former chief biomilitary advisor of the Whitefire program. Her voice carried like a blade drawn from a sheath. "We're here to recover lost government property," she said. "Designation Unit Serial 4. Nora stood on the porch beside Eli, snow gathering on her shoulders. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The war had come back for its ghosts. Whitefire lives. Inside the cabin, maps and satellite images sprawled across the table. Dana's gloved hand traced a single red coordinate near the northern edge of the ravine. "This is where the signal originated," she said. "3 nights ago, the echo frequency. It reactivated." Nora folded her arms. "Echo isn't a command pulse. It's memory." Dana gave a short, clinical laugh. "Memory doesn't live, Ranger Vale. It's just data, and data can be rewritten." She unlatched a steel case and opened it. Inside lay a small device, circular, humming softly, glowing with a cold blue light. "The neural resonator," she explained, "version 9. It can resynchronize Whitefire waveforms. Once I tune it to the echo frequency, Unit 04 will return and obey." Eli stepped forward, anger flickering behind his calm. "Obey? You're talking about it like it's a piece of machinery." Dana didn't even look at him. "You're confusing sentiment with science. Organic or synthetic, it was built to respond to human instruction. You pull a trigger, it moves. That's all." Nora rose from her chair, the firelight catching in her eyes. "No," she said quietly, "that's not all. It's not property. It's a living being. And you've lost the right to even say its name." For a moment no one spoke. The air felt charged, like the second before lightning strikes. Then Dana smiled, small, tight, cruel. "Do you know why it found you, Nora?" The question cut through the silence like a wire snapping. Nora frowned. "What are you talking about?" Dana leaned forward. "Because I wanted it to." Eli's chair scraped against the floor. "You set her up." The scientist's tone stayed maddeningly calm. 3 years ago, I received fragments of the old Whitefire emotional resonance data. Cross-referencing with living neural patterns, I found one subject whose empathy frequency matched Dr. Marion Shaw's within a margin of 0.03%. She pointed at Nora. "You." Nora's voice cracked. "You mean, I arranged an environmental simulation," Dana said, almost proud. "Stress factors, isolation, hypothermia, mortal danger. The wire restraints and the blizzard were necessary stimuli. We needed to trigger Unit 04's protective subroutine. You were never the target. You were the catalyst." Nora stared at her in disbelief. "You used me as bait." "Correct." Dana lifted the resonator, the device pulsing softly in her palm. "And it worked. It responded exactly as the data predicted. Now I'll do it again. Properly." Eli slammed his hand against the table. "You're insane. You're resurrecting something that died trying to be free." Dana didn't flinch. "Freedom is irrelevant. The directive plan requires integration of emotional memory into controllable assets. I'm here to finish what I started." Eli's anger broke through his restraint. "You call this progress? Tying people to trees, electrocuting animals, and calling it evolution?" Dana met his fury with calm indifference. "This is science, Mr. Carter. Humanity learns by control. We built emotions once. We can reclaim them." Nora stepped forward, her voice low but trembling with force. "You can't reclaim compassion. It isn't a frequency you can capture. It's a choice." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "You think you understand it better than me? I created Whitefire." "And you killed it," Nora said. For the first time, Dana's composure faltered, just slightly. Her hand tightened around the resonator. The glow brightened, spilling across her face. "If it doesn't come back willingly, I'll activate Override Theta. That pulse will erase every remaining signal linked to Unit 04, permanently." Eli's voice rose, raw and furious. "You'd be erasing a living consciousness." Dana's reply came soft and sharp. "No, I'd be decommissioning a malfunctioning machine." Nora stepped closer, her expression fierce and unyielding. "A machine doesn't bow its head to say goodbye. It doesn't protect another from pain. It doesn't forgive." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Only something with a heart does that." The two women stood locked in silence, firelight trembling between them. For a long, suspended moment, even the wind outside seemed to wait. Then Dana turned away. Sentiment, she muttered. That's how the last generation failed. Nora crossed to the filing cabinet. From the lowest drawer, she pulled out a small black drive, the archive Marion Shaw had left behind. She inserted it into the old console by the wall. The screen flickered to life, lines of code dissolving into stored video logs. Images appeared. The laboratories of Theta Sector, scientists in sterile suits, notes, neural maps. Then, in cold text, the heading, Whitefire Project Termination Order. Authorized by Dr. Evelyn Danner. Eli's throat tightened. You gave the kill command. Danner's face remained impassive, but the pulse in her neck betrayed her. Nora scrolled further. Target units 02 and 04. Objective, eliminate evidence. Transfer viable code to directive plan. She turned to Danner, voice breaking. You didn't just build them, you buried them. Danner's gaze drifted toward the floor. When she spoke, her tone was lower, almost human. You think I wanted to? I chose the nation over ghosts. Someone had to. Nora shut down the monitor and faced her squarely. You chose fear. I'll choose mercy. Danner's mouth trembled for half a heartbeat, the first crack in her armor. Then she straightened again, voice cold as metal. You think it'll listen to you instead of me? Nora walked to the door. If you want to see it again, she said quietly, walk into the storm yourself. It only listens to those who've learned how to ask for forgiveness. The door slammed behind her, leaving Danner alone with the dying hum of the resonator. For a moment, the woman stood still, the weight of years pressing down through her spine. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered. Outside, the sky darkened. Snow began to fall again, slow, deliberate, like the turning of an hourglass. Whitefire Project Termination Order. Authorized by Dr. Evelyn Danner. Target units 02 and 04. Objective, eliminate evidence. Transfer viable code to directive plan. Eli stepped into the doorway. Storm's building, he said, pressure's dropping fast. Danner didn't answer. He turned to Nora, who stood on the porch, staring east toward the mountains, where fog now spilled down the slopes like smoke. Third storm, he murmured. She nodded. They'll come for what's left of Whitefire. And us? He asked. Nora's voice was steady. We'll stand for what it became. Eli smiled faintly. Freedom? Remembrance, she said. If they come to chain memory, we'll help it run. She slipped a gloved hand into her coat pocket and felt the cool weight of the small metal fragment she'd carried since the ravine. The inscription pressed against her palm, Let memory live. It pulsed faintly, a warmth that wasn't mechanical, but alive. Lightning flickered on the horizon, followed by a low, rolling growl of thunder. Eli looked toward the mountains. You think Phantom can hear it? Nora's eyes followed the storm, her hair lifting in the wind. He always could. Far away, deep within the cloud bank, something answered. 3 slow, distant booms, too rhythmic to be thunder, too alive to be chance. Danner stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the sound. For the first time, uncertainty clouded her eyes. Nora turned to her. You wanted to control memory, she said softly. But you forgot what it was made of. Danner's hand tightened around the resonator. And what's that? Regret, Nora said, and hope. The wind howled, carrying the last words off into the gathering storm. The third blizzard was coming, and this time it wouldn't be the elements that tested them. It would be everything they'd tried to bury. Let memory live. The storm returned the following night. It came without warning. No gradual build, no whisper of wind before the roar. One moment the forest was silent, the next it was alive with thunder and light. The snow began as a whisper and then thickened into a white wall, swallowing the trees and the sky together. Deep in the heart of Black Pine Ridge, the clearing at the edge of Iron Ravine burned with artificial light. Dr. Evelyn Danner stood in the center of it, wrapped in a gray tactical coat, her face haloed by the glare of floodlights mounted on armored vehicles. Her team worked in silence, setting up a steel tripod that bristled with cables and antennae. The neural resonator sat at its core, a sphere of polished metal humming with a cold, insect-like drone. The snow hissed against its surface, melting instantly. Resonator online, Danner said into her headset. Initiate Theta 5 sequence. On a nearby monitor, a waveform bloomed, a pulse so low it was felt more than heard. The air itself began to tremble. Leaves shivered, ice cracked, even the heartbeat of the forest seemed to stutter. Nora and Eli stood several hundred meters away, flanked by two silent soldiers. They were not restrained, but their rifles said enough. From where they stood, they could see the resonator's pale glow spilling into the snowstorm like a second moon. Nora pressed a hand against her chest. Her pulse thudded irregularly, matching the vibration in the air. "She's not calling it," she murmured. "She's awakening it." Eli's jaw tightened. Or the part of it that still remembers. The hum deepened. The trees around the clearing bent as if bowing to something unseen. The first shapes appeared from the west. Black silhouettes lumbering through the snow. Three massive forms broke from the fog. X3, X7, X9. Their bodies were half ice, half alloy. Their eyes burned red beneath the frost. Every movement groaned with the sound of metal fibers grinding against bone. They stopped at the edge of the light, steam rising from their nostrils like exhaust. Dana raised a handheld controller, her voice steady. "Unit X Series, acknowledge Directive Theta 0. Proceed to retrieval point." The red eyes brightened, synchronizing to her pulse. Then, as one of the creatures turned toward the valley, toward Clearwater Station, Nora's breath caught. "She's sending them to the archives, to erase Marion's data." Eli's voice cracked. "We can't let her." Before he could finish, the night exploded with sound. A single roar cut through the storm, deeper than thunder, heavier than the wind. Dana froze, her headset trembling with static. Her lips moved around the name she had spent years pretending no longer mattered. "Unit 04, she whispered. "You're still alive." The resonator's screen blinked. Signal detected. Subject proximity. 480 meters. Through the blinding snow, something vast began to take shape. Phantom. He emerged from the east, like a phantom indeed, a mountain of black steel and scarred tissue. His mane was laced with frost, his breath thick as smoke. The storm bent around him, as if afraid to touch him. Lightning flashed, illuminating the old scars that stitched his body, marks of chains, burns, and the half-healed lines where human hands had once tried to reshape nature. Dana's voice dropped to a whisper of triumph. "Engage Theta Override." The monitor flared. "Link established." A low frequency rolled out across the forest, shaking the ground. Phantom staggered mid-step. His neck jerked violently. His muscles twitched as the invisible current seized him. "Override signal stable," said one of the technicians. Dana's eyes glinted. "Bring him in." The sound that followed wasn't thunder, it was anguish. Phantom's body convulsed as the wave tore through him. His hooves gouged deep scars into the earth. His eyes flickered between silver and black, torn between the instinct to obey and the memory to resist. "Don't listen to her," Nora shouted through the wind. She broke free of the soldiers, running forward, her voice raw. "Fight it, Phantom. Remember who you are." The resonator's pulse grew harsher, pressing the air flat against her chest. Dana's voice rang out, sharp and sure. "Increase amplitude 50%. The snow turned to sleet, slicing sideways through the clearing. The X-Series moved in formation, circling Phantom like wolves around their wounded alpha. He stumbled, his breath hitching into short, ragged bursts. For a moment, he lowered his head as though in surrender. Then he lifted it again, his gaze locking on Nora. Between them, through the blizzard and the chaos, she saw the flicker of recognition. The same light she'd seen in the ravine, the same look that had once chosen mercy over obedience. She raised the small metal tag in her hand. The letters glimmered faintly through the snow. "Let memory live." "It's not a command," she cried. "It's a memory you chose. You chose compassion once. Choose it again." For a long, breathless second, nothing moved. Then Phantom screamed. It was not the cry of an animal. It was something deeper, a sound that tore at the bones of the world, resonating with everything alive or once alive. The resonator's readings spiked. Dana's eyes went wide. "Impossible," she hissed. "The signal, it's reversing." On the screen, a warning flashed in red. "Resonance inversion, emotional feedback detected." The waveform folded in on itself, reversing polarity. The control frequency transformed into something unquantifiable, raw emotional energy looping back toward its source. Dana reached for the shutdown switch, but it was too late. Phantom charged. The impact was cataclysmic. The clearing exploded in white light. Snow and splinters spiraled into the air. The resonator shattered under his hooves, fragments of burning metal scattering across the ground like falling stars. Dana was thrown backward into the side of a transport vehicle. The windshield burst from the shockwave. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then came the echo, a sound both mechanical and mournful, half scream, half symphony. Phantom's body glowed from within, veins of light racing along his frame. The X-series froze where they stood, their eyes, once red, dimmed to grey. The storm around them softened, as if unsure how to proceed without orders. Eli caught Nora before the blast knocked her down. Together, they turned toward the creature at the center of it all. From his neck, a bright pulse flickered. Not blue anymore, but silver. Almost white. On Dana's broken laptop, words appeared across the screen in jagged text. Echo signal active. Lines of code streamed faster and faster, merging with files, archives, recordings, all of Whitefire's hidden history. "It's sending the data," Nora said, her voice shaking. "It's sending everything." Eli nodded, tears streaking his face. "It's choosing truth over survival." Phantom swayed, the light inside him faltering. Plates of metal cracked and fell away, revealing patches of raw, living muscle beneath. He raised his head one last time and looked directly at Nora. Lightning struck the mountain behind him, flooding the clearing in pure white. When the light faded, Phantom was on his knees. The great black form that had defied man and machine alike was still, his breath shallow. Dana crawled toward him through the snow, her voice barely more than a whisper. He wasn't supposed to die." Nora knelt beside the fallen creature. Her gloved hand brushed the jagged metal ring around his neck, feeling the warmth still pulsing there. Faint, fading. The sound beneath her fingers was like a heartbeat slowing to rest. "You didn't fight to destroy," she said softly. "You fought to remember." Eli joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His face was pale, his eyes wet. Behind them, Dana sank to her knees, staring at the ruin of the resonator. "Marion was right," she murmured. "She said if memory ever grew a heart, it could never die." Nora looked at her over her shoulder. "You can still save yourself," she said. "Don't let your own memory be erased." The wind rose, sweeping across the clearing. Snow drifted down, soft and unending, covering Phantom's body like a shroud. From the mist beyond, a faint shape appeared. Silver grey, smaller, limping slightly. Ash. He approached silently, stopping beside the fallen black giant. He lowered his head, touching his muzzle to Phantom's neck. It was not mourning, it was communion. The last gesture of a bond that had survived creation, exile, and war. The forest held its breath. Eli bent down, noticing a small glint half buried in the snow near Phantom's hoof. He picked it up. A fragment of steel, etched with fading letters. "04 Theta." He closed his fist around it. "He ended where he began," he said quietly. The wind eased, clouds parted, every machine in the clearing powered down, screens dark, engines silent. Even the snow seemed to fall more gently. Then, on the dead monitor beside Dana, a final message appeared. "Echo archive transmitted. Global link established." Eli laughed under his breath, the sound breaking into a sob. "He did it. The world's going to know." Dana sat motionless, the pale glow of the screen painting her face. For once, her eyes looked almost human. Tired, haunted, small. Nora turned toward the light where Phantom lay buried beneath the snow. He lived long enough to set memory free. A wind rose, carrying with it a faint rhythmic sound, 3 low, deliberate beats that echoed through the valley like a final heartbeat. Ash lifted his head, gave a soft, trembling whinny, then turned toward the forest. His silver shape moved into the trees, fading into the same mist that had once carried his brother away. Nora stood there, hand clenched around the fragment of steel, whispering into the silence, "Let memory live." The wind took her words and scattered them across the mountains, where they would echo long after the snow had buried all evidence of what had happened here. For a moment before the storm fully passed, she thought she heard an answering sound. 3 slow hoofbeats, distant but clear. And then only peace. Signal detected. Subject proximity, 480 meters. Link established. Let memory live. Resonance inversion. Emotional feedback detected. Echo signal active. O4 theta. Echo archive transmitted. Global link established. 6 months after the last storm, the world finally stopped pretending it didn't know. The files had spread faster than anyone could contain them. A single untraceable transmission, the echo signal Phantom had released before the end, had seeded itself into the global network, replicating across continents in minutes. Within days, servers filled with archives once buried under military secrecy, video logs, research journals, field notes, the private correspondence of Dr. Marion Shaw, and even the red-stamped orders signed by Evelyn Danner herself. By the end of that week, it had a name. The press called it the Echo Leak. No one knew who first coined the term. It appeared in a late-night feed, then on a dozen foreign sites, and finally on the front page of global news. The Echo Leak, the largest ethical breach in military history. It was more than a scandal. It was a revelation. Clips circulated of metal-framed horses collapsing under tests, of scientists whispering arguments about programmed empathy, of Marion Shaw recording a trembling note. They've learned to recognize us, and that may be our salvation or our undoing. Public outrage was immediate. Governments denied, then hesitated, then announced investigations. Evelyn Danner was quietly detained. The footage of her leaving the federal building was played endlessly on news networks. Her hair undone by the wind, eyes blank, hands cuffed but trembling. For the first time, the cold precision was gone. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She simply walked, a figure hollowed out by her own creation. A week later, a press conference was held in Washington. A spokesman in a dark suit stepped to the podium. Behind him, the seal of the Department of Defense looked smaller than usual. Effective immediately, he read, the Whitefire Initiative is formally dissolved. All derivative research and neural resonance technology is to be confiscated and decommissioned. We will not attempt to reproduce compassion through command ever again. The room was silent. Cameras clicked. Somewhere, snow melted. The Echo Leak, the largest ethical breach in military history. They've learned to recognize us, and that may be our salvation or our undoing. Far away in Cold Hollow, spring was arriving early. The forest exhaled after years of holding its breath. Ice broke along the creeks and patches of green reappeared on the hillsides. The scars of the battle were fading. Broken cables melted into snow, turned to soft earth. On the edge of the recovering woods, a granite monument stood, newly raised. Its surface was simple, its inscription cleaner than any flag or seal. To those who remembered what we forgot. Nora and Eli stood before it in the late afternoon light. The wind carried the smell of thawing pine and damp soil. Nora brushed her fingers along the carved letters. The last memory, she said softly, has finally gone home. To those who remembered what we forgot. The next morning, the forest felt weightless. Nora knelt beside the monument with a small metal cylinder in her hands. The original data drive, the one Phantom had awakened months ago beneath the snow. The casing was dented, scorched around the edges, but the inner light still pulsed faintly, like a heart refusing to die. Eli stood behind her, shovel in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "That's the last untouched copy. It's history." She smiled faintly. "Exactly. And history belongs to the earth now, not to us." She dug a small hollow in the soil beside the stone, the dirt still soft from the thaw. When she placed the cylinder inside, the faint hum ceased. Not in defeat, but in rest. "Let it sleep," she murmured. "It's done enough." Eli filled the hole gently, then pressed a pine branch upright in the mound. A simple marker, green against grey stone. A gust swept through the clearing, rattling the needles overhead. The sound merged with something faint but unmistakable. the echo of hooves in the distance. Eli turned toward the ridge. Listen. Up on the slope, a handful of wild horses stood motionless in the morning light. Among them was one silver-grey figure, older now, the faint scars around his neck hidden beneath a long winter coat. Ash. He stood with his head high, blind eyes reflecting the dawn like liquid metal. Nora rose slowly. See, she said, memory doesn't need servers. It survives in those who still remember. Neither of them spoke for a while, only the soft thud of hooves answered, 3 low beats echoing across the hills. The valley's ancient rhythm of gratitude. 2 years later, Cold Hollow had changed. The valley that had once been the site of war machines and secrecy now bore a wooden sign at its entrance, Echo Mustang Division, for those who remember. Built on the foundation of the old Ranger outpost, the sanctuary spread across the lower meadows, a patchwork of rebuilt barns, open paddocks, and fenced pastures that glowed gold in the morning light. The name Division was deliberate, Eli had explained. It wasn't a company or a foundation or even a refuge. It was a reminder. A unit divided from what came before. The Mustangs that wandered its fields bore faint traces of the Whitefire past, genetic markers, embedded IDs, or the shallow grooves where old implants had once been removed. Each one was a survivor of the program's reach. Ash was their leader. He had gone blind after the storm, the optic fibers in his eyes burned by the same surge that had ended Phantom's life. But it hadn't changed him. Every morning, as the first light touched the fence line, he would raise his head and move, slowly at first, then with growing confidence, his hooves tracing the same path to the open grass. The others followed, always 3 paces behind. Eli noted it in his field journal one spring day. Though sightless, Ash remembers the road to the pasture. Memory has become his compass. Nora spent most of her days in the observation barn, surrounded by screens she rarely turned on. Her research had changed, no longer an attempt to quantify behavior, but to listen to it. She wrote papers on the language of empathy and the organic nature of recognition, but she never sought publication. Some things, she told Eli, should only be learned, not measured. Visitors came sometimes, a journalist, a university team, a handful of curious tourists. They rarely stayed long. They found the valley too quiet, too strange, as if the air itself demanded reverence. And sometimes, when dusk settled over the paddocks, they would glimpse Nora standing alone by the fence, her face turned toward the distant ridges, listening to something the wind carried, a sound only she seemed to hear. Every evening, as shadows stretched long across the field, Ash would circle the fence 3 times. The rhythm of his steps was steady, patient, sacred. 3 beats. Always 3. The same call that had once answered from the fog. Echo Mustang Division, for those who remember. Though sightless, Ash remembers the road to the pasture. Memory has become his compass. It was an early spring when the letter arrived. Eli found it on the desk in the office. A plain brown envelope with no name, no return address, no postal stamp. The paper was damp around the edges, as if it had traveled a long way through rain. He turned it over, frowning. Nora? She looked up from her notes. What is it? Don't know. Doesn't look official. He slit the seal with a pocket knife. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, typed in bold black font. Directive Plan Active, Appalachian Sector. Taped to the bottom was a scrap of something dark and brittle. A fragment of burned leather, faintly embossed with the characters Div 9. Eli's expression hardened. Division 9. That can't be. They dismantled everything. Nora took the fragment gently from his hand. The charred edge left soot on her fingers. Or they changed the name, she said. The two exchanged a long, heavy look. Outside, the wind picked up. A moment later came the sound, sharp, deliberate, of hooves striking earth. Once, twice, a third time. Ash, standing by the gate, was pawing at the ground. His head was turned eastward, toward the mist that hung over the Appalachian line. Eli exhaled slowly. Guess the past isn't finished talking. Nora's eyes stayed on the horizon. No, she said, it's just waiting for someone else to remember. Directive Plan Active, Appalachian Sector, Div 9. The morning they left, the world was wrapped in fog. The air smelled of thawing soil and pine resin. A pale sun hung behind the mist, trying to burn its way through. Nora dressed in her old ranger jacket, the same one she'd worn the night she first met Phantom. The leather had softened with time, the color darkened by years of weather. Eli carried a canvas pack with notebooks, a field recorder, and a folded map worn nearly to threads. Ash waited by the fence, his mane silver in the diffused light. Nora approached slowly, running her hands along his neck. "You still know the way," she whispered. Eli smiled. "You talk like he understands you." "He does," she said simply. "He's memory, not muscle." She swung herself up onto his back. The saddle creaked. The cold air bit their faces. For a moment, they both looked back. The sanctuary lay quiet, morning light spilling over the roofs and fences, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Beyond it, the forest shimmered, green again, alive. "Ready?" Eli asked. Nora nodded. "Let's see where the story goes next." Ash stepped forward, hooves crunching on frost-hardened grass. As they rode out through the open gate, the fog thinned, revealing the distant outline of the eastern ridges. Each step felt like crossing a threshold, from aftermath into continuation, from memory into mission. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of other hooves, the herd following, invisible but near. Nora glanced over her shoulder. On the ridge above the paddock, silhouettes gathered, mustangs in the early light, their forms half blurred by haze. Ash gave a low whinny, answered by a chorus of replies. "Listen," Eli said, "they're saying goodbye." Nora shook her head. "No, they're saying go." The sun broke through at last, scattering gold across the field. As the two riders moved eastward, the mist dissolved into ribbons of light, turning the air silver. The sound of hooves, Ash's and the herd's, echoed across the valley in three slow, resonant beats that carried farther than distance should allow. It was a sound the valley would remember long after the riders were gone. When the herd's echoes faded, the wind took over, whispering through the grass, through the broken fences, through the pine needles that shimmered with dew. On the gatepost, the carved words caught the rising sun. "For those who remember," and beneath them, almost hidden by moss, someone had added a smaller line, burned into the wood by hand. "Let memory live." The road wound upward through the high passes, where the snow still lingered in the shadows. By midday, the valley was just a silver thread behind them. Eli took out his journal and began to write, his handwriting uneven from the horse's rhythm. The world moves on, but some stories walk beside it. What began as a signal has become a call. If memory is alive, it must keep traveling. He closed the book and looked ahead. Nora was silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the fog grew again. Not threatening, just waiting. "Ash will find it," she said after a long while. "He always does. And if he doesn't, then we'll make our own way." The path narrowed between two cliffs. Sunlight broke through in shafts, lighting patches of snow like scattered glass. For a moment, Nora thought she saw something move in the glare. A dark figure standing far off on the ridge, motionless, watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. Only the echo remained, faint, distant, rhythmic. 3 beats, always 3. She smiled. "He's still with us." Eli looked at her, then at the endless road ahead. "Then let's follow the sound." And they did. 2 riders moving into the rising light, following the memory of a heartbeat that refused to die. For those who remember, let memory live. The world moves on, but some stories walk beside it. What began as a signal has become a call. If memory is alive, it must keep traveling. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.